Before we start, we're just going to do a short check-in. So we've already checked the judges. When I say your name, please say a short yes. So just to make sure that your camera and microphones are working. Viktor?
Well, I'm here, but I'm not sure about what like there are like two Victors in the room. But well, if it's me, yeah, me. So
Okay.
my Wi-Fi is really bad, so I'm going to be only by audio. Is that possible?
So during the debate, yes. During the speech, it's possible if you don't have any other options, but we prefer if you're also visible. Can you try it out for just
Yeah, I can try.
and
Definitely.
see if it's going well? So ideally, we'd prefer for you to see you, basically.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I don't see any problems, but basically, I think what will happen is just if you break up mid-speech a lot and you have like connection issues, then you can turn off your camera and we will understand. So we will remember this request. Okay, Eduardo is here. Can you just say yes?
Yes, I'm here. Can you listen to me? Is my audio?
We can see you, we can hear you. Okay, Enzo?
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm here. I'll also maintain my camera turned off during the other speaking, but during my speech, I will try to maintain my camera on. So
you also have internet connection issues?
Yeah.
Yes.
In Brazil, it's being really difficult because during this COVID-19 pandemics, we're having lots of struggles with internet connection.
Okay, I understand.
Sometimes the camera makes it more difficult, yeah.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so on prop team, we have Alexandr. Are you here?
Yes, we are all here speaking.
You're all here speaking. Okay, cool. So there's no need to check that anymore. Okay, so yeah, so for cameras, we've already settled that. There's a noise. I'm not sure where the noise is coming from.
No, I was just going to ask Team Brazil if it's okay with them that we stream, record, and after competition upload this debate.
Oh, no problem at all. Will it be on YouTube? If you could send the links for us later.
Okay, during the debate, we will send it to the debate chat. It will be on YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm just gonna share my stopwatch with you guys. Basically, we're gonna do it this way. I'm gonna just have a second timer just in case. If one of the judges would like to also keep a timer, just in case, you know, just in case something happens, I recommend it and I would greatly appreciate it so that we have a second timer. And I think that's pretty much it. We can start the debate. So the motion is this House would ban corporate sponsorships of research within academic or educational institutions. Cool, that's it. So in terms of POI preference, I think it's best if you say before the actual speech so that people can actually remember what your preference is. And we can get going. So I give the floor to the first speaker of Team Proposition to start this debate. Here.
Okay, just in terms of POIs, me and also the entire team would prefer to receive them vocally. So it's just okay if you interrupt us and say like POI. Okay, so sorry, 3, 2, 1. We think that knowledge is power and that private companies already have too much of it. We find it reprehensible that while the shareholders of Marlboro were able to earn millions of dollars, they put the lives of hundreds of thousands of people at risk. We have never been more proud to propose. I will do 3 things in my speech. Firstly, I will discuss our stance, and then secondly and thirdly, I'll present our 2 arguments. So 2 points under our stance. Firstly, we want to ban like all corporations from donating and subsidizing this academic and educational research, right? But this also includes like any attempts to bypass this ban, such as companies creating an alternative body, or such as like individuals from these companies pretending to donate on their own behalf when they are actually just representing the company. But secondly, we believe that there should be a general sense of impartiality when it comes to those academic decisions, because we believe that akin to the judiciary, they are an arbiter that presumes objectivity. In today's world of subjectivity, we think that they are one of the like last beacons of hope to provide objective information, and that is why they must remain impartial. Now, moving on to my first argument about what subsidized research in a second enables the projection of perverse market incentives, but I'll take the POI.
Okay, so what about partiality that happens when the government is funding our research?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
What about partiality that happens when the government is funding and sponsoring a research?
Okay, I'm sorry, could we just pause? Our audio has like completely crashed. We don't hear anything.
Okay, so it's paused to 150. Can you hear me? I'm assuming not.
Yeah, I think we fixed it. Our speaker just like broke down, so yeah.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes. Now it's okay.
Okay, you can hear me. So just in case, maybe use something else, not the speaker, like your laptop. But if you can hear me now, it should be okay.
Yeah, we couldn't listen the major arguments because the audio was already a little bit flawed. Could you repeat this part?
So like, should I start from the beginning or?
No, so the rules say that you should continue where you left off, which is 150. And you had just finished your introduction and model, and you were going into your first argument. And actually answering the POI.
The rule is to restart where the problem started, and that was at 124.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so I'm not sure how I do that.
I'll just like set up a timer that says 640 or 636, which would resemble the 124 left, or like the fact that 124 has elapsed.
646. Yeah, you could.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna do it this way. Okay. Cool. So when you're ready, just maybe count to 1 so that I know.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'll take the POI now.
So what about partiality that happens in academic researchers when the government is sponsoring this research? Due to the government funding, the partiality happens. What do you have to say about it?
We don't think this is necessarily the case because the government is doing this through like specific organs that are supposed to be impartial themselves, right? When the government like supports R&D, we don't think that this R&D is there to, you know, create false information about the fact that actually fat is more harmful than sugar, right? We like don't think this is categorically different. Okay, so what is important to note under this first argument is that there are massive for-profit incentives that are present in the current private market. This is because stakeholders only want one thing, and that is mainly for the share price to go up. But what is important is that private companies usually create massive amounts of externalities, and they want to cover this up to attract more customers to pump up their share price. And we will give you 3 different examples of where this has happened or is still happening in the status quo. Firstly, we give you the example of the cigarette industry, which for far too long has denied that cigarettes cause harmful effects to your health, right? And note that sure, the truth has then risen to the surface, but without this subsidized research, the truth could have come out maybe like 5, 10, or 15 years earlier, which means that hundreds of thousands to millions of lives could have been saved because these people would engage in the consumption of cigarettes with a consent that would be informed. And this is categorically different than what they have done before that. But we give you no thank you the example of the sugar industry, which like has subsidized research that has cherry-picked specific countries, such as like the 6-country study, or that has cherry-picked specific areas within America that would show that fat actually is much more harmful than sugar. Now, this is very important because then they can use this to advertise their own low-fat products that are, at the other hand, pumped up with sugar. These products that are more harmful to your health than the products that contain fat. This is why the obesity epidemic in the United States is so high. This is why, like, the rates of diabetes have soared in the past couple of decades. And this is important because although today the research that like this disputes these studies has shown up, many people still believe that fat is more harmful than sugar, which shows that the harms of this false research are very often irreversible. But thirdly, the gambling industry, which still subsidizes this research today by like literally giving money to Harvard Medical School to then give them research about why gambling addiction is not as prevalent or is not as harmful in and of itself. This is important because not only are then more people likely to gamble and ruin their lives, but also the gambling industry doesn't have the obligation to compensate them because it can put the blame onto them because they're the ones that are ill, because they're the ones that should have regulated themselves. This is even more important in the context of media cycles because media need publicity, which very often lead them to like sensationalism. So when like some extreme like subsidized study comes out, they're likely to publish it to get as much views as possible. And this is something that spreads to the people, right? And we say that in many cases, it takes a long time for the correct information to resurface and be like published by the media again. But even if this happens, we give you 2 reasons for why this harm is very hard to correct. Because firstly, most people will actually not receive this information, even if it is published again, right? But secondly, many people can be like left biased or like be left uncertain about what is actually the true thing. And this is important because under our side, you don't get these subsidized studies, right? Under our side, people don't have to be confused. Under our side, people can make more rational decisions that can be more beneficial for their own lives. And the crucial thing here is the authority of these academic institutions, because there is a difference between like when some random casino funds their own study about why gambling is actually okay versus when literally the Harvard Medical School does it, right? Which is a recent example. The impacts here are that people are misled into harmful decisions because people are then more likely to die early from obesity, to get cancer because the cigarette industry has been lying, or to have like estranged fathers in destroyed families who have been falsely led into the narrative that gambling is okay and that if you are addicted, it is your own fault because you're the one that is mentally ill. Now, moving on to my second argument about why this subsidized research delegitimizes other like rigorous and proper academic research. We give you 2 reasons for that. The first one is that it creates confusion, because when I get like studies that, for example, contradict themselves, like a study that says, that actually red wine is something that is really great, but a study on the other hand saying that actually no, it can be harmful when consumed in large quantities, I don't necessarily know what to believe. And this is important because therefore I am less likely to properly trust like academic research and not base my decisions off of that research because I can think that it might be flawed. But secondly, it reinforces the confirmation bias because people that have their own entrenched beliefs can very often easily opt out to say that this study or that this research is not necessarily true. But very often it is problematic in terms of like politics, because although 97% of scientists today say that climate change is real, you still have the 3% that are being heavily subsidized by private companies such as like the oil lobby, right? And this is important because then extreme right-wing politicians or like specific echo chambers on the internet can point to this 3% of researchers and say, hey guys, what they are telling you is not real. Climate change is not real. This is, for example, prevalent in the Czech Republic, where the leader of the right-wing extremist party SPD actively points to this research and has gotten more than like 12% of the vote in a recent election. And this is important because when, by the year 2050, the UN predicts that there will be 250 million climate refugees, people that literally cannot plant food because there are too many droughts, we say that solving these issues properly and solving them fast is very important. And that is why you should vote proposition.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm not sure if you heard that annoying bell, but yeah, hope it didn't disturb you. Okay, so just I'm gonna give a few seconds for the judges since it's hard to coordinate otherwise. Thank you for that speech. Meanwhile.
I'm good to go. Thank you.
Just a sec. Okay, thank you very much for that speech, and I give the floor to the first speaker of team opposition. You're here.
Okay, so I speak for the whole opposition and I say I prefer to receive verbal POIs, so you guys can just vocalize when you have a POI. Can I start?
If you could just, not yet, let me just first reset the timer. So again, I'm gonna move it to a stopwatch instead of a timer so that we can see the full speaking time.
Okay.
So just so you know, you're gonna see it from 0 to 8, basically. Okay. Cool. So you can start.
Dear judges and fellow debaters, I would like to start my speech as the first speaker of the opposition, stating that we are very glad to be here this afternoon. We, as the opposition, are completely against the motion which states this House would ban corporate sponsorship of research within academic or educational institutions. I will divide my speech in two parts. First, rebuttal of the proposition arguments. Second, the presentation of our two main arguments that, no matter the already clear deficiencies we addressed in the proposition, stand by themselves on the spotlight of logical reasoning. Our second speaker will advance our third argument. Well, the first argument proposition brought to this debate was that the fact that corporate for-profit institutions can harm the development and the research. Well, yes, they do care about share prices going up, but in no way this is harmful. Actually, development teams will be sponsored to development, and this would also create a better framework for them to work. So let's imagine this corporate team wants to solve a problem about the air conditioners in their company. What you're telling me is that the problem that they want to solve to increase their productivity or their happiness of their employees would be a problem to the development team because they would not be unbiased. But especially in science, technology, and engineering, this is not a problem at all because they are solving a real-life problem that can be applied in many places. The second argument they bring is about media and ethics. And we buy that it is hard to solve wrong data being spread all over the news and etc. But we do think the ethical issue of profitability is related to the ethical structure of the institution, which would also happen in other types of funding when from corrupted means. We can use, by example, Brazil, which has faced really huge problems about government putting a lot of money in some types of research while ignoring other types of research, especially sociologic and social research in general. And this also comes, I'm not going to spoil it, but in our third argument, we will advance on that. Now I would like to present our two main arguments. The first argument we have is that private investment actually aids innovation. Private investments are essential for general innovation, especially in technology. When the market discovers a new technical problem, something the theoretical and academic basis already exists and cannot solve, they recur to research institutions, universities, private research hospitals, laboratories, in order to solve them under the structure of strong scientific framework. Endorsed by private money, universities, for instance, would develop the solution, theoretical or practical, to the problems presented. These solutions are innovative and bring a new round of innovation to every sphere of society. An example of that would be the discovery of the energy basic metric, the joule. In the 19th century, Germany, a metallurgical industry contracted by the Prussian University to answer a question about how high temperature melting resulted in the quantification of energy in joules, a breakthrough innovation that modeled the world as we know it, promoted by private investment. But let's analyze it on the scenario where there is a common need to answer a question, like the COVID-19 crisis. Corporate and research institutions wanted to tackle this problem by developing a vaccine. In situations just like this one, the corporate world can provide the money and resources to the highly keen microbiologists and biotechnologists and bioengineers to put the full of their capacities on solving this pandemic. Actually, that is what we have been seeing in the fight against COVID-19, where over $7 billion was donated by corporate donors to aid the development of a vaccine. I would take any POIs you guys have now.
But why can't other forms of funding, such as like governments, crowdsourcing, or different NGOs provide that? Why does it have to be companies?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. We will further advance that on our third argument, but I will tell you that this comes majorly because most governments in the world cannot afford to give full funding to research, especially in developing countries such as Brazil, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and etc. And about crowdsourcing, this can be very ineffective because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars, which cannot come from any other source but private in this type of country. Okay, I'm going to advance into our second main argument. Private investment are beneficial to the academic community, both directly and indirectly, with practical, real-world research and development opportunities. The academic research worldwide faces a general lack of practical and applicable knowledge, complementing the theoretical and well-established reality of the classroom, especially in STEM and in developing countries with a crawling research community. With the private initiative, new research opportunities would be brought into the academic environment. Professors will have the chance to engage in real-life solutions and start research groups with the help of students. This integration will make the learning experience in the institution more diverse and well-rounded, giving the student and staff that the know-how to enter the corporate field in the future if they wish so. For example, an engineering student at a new public university in Latin America get the chance to participate in a research group about industrial processes to help a local industry to increase their productivity. By the end of the research, the students will have learned how the industrial work is, how to develop outcome-oriented products, and how to integrate in the corporate market. While the professor of the student would also get a better understanding on how to guide students in case they want to pursue careers outside the academic environment. So maybe even in the corporate environment, industrial environment, all these practical applicabilities of knowledge, they would also receive practical experience to, in the future, have more options in their own career. So even professors would be benefited with the know-how. It's a win-win situation to the academic community, where the investment necessary to aid innovation comes alongside with practical know-how that enforces the quality of the institutions. You can ask your POI now if you have any.
When companies need to do research to optimize their own production, they don't need the academic sphere. Amazon or IBM is already doing research on their own, and they are doing just fine.
Yeah, again, that's a great argument, but I need to tell you that maybe in developed countries where new industries can have like a really cool development framework, that's true. But in most countries in the world, that is not true. Industries are still small, they cannot afford to have full capacities of research, and that's why maybe the academic research is the best way to give them the know-how and the practicability with high-keen professionals that have already worked in the field for many years. So after I explain to you both of my arguments, I would like to state that, yes, there are problems with partiality, and we both agree on that. But at the same time, both our sides believe we need to tackle this. We just don't think that giving all the power to government institutions or even crowdsourcing, as they propose in their POI, is the best way to do so. So after I explain the reasoning of my arguments, I beg the judges to vote for the opposition. Thank you very much. I end my speech.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. And I'm just gonna give a few seconds for the judges to wrap up their notes. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I give the floor to the second speaker of team government. You're here.
Okay, am I visible and am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. So there's a background noise, but I think we're gonna have to deal with it. It won't stop. But you're audible.
I'm outside the window. We tried to close it a little tighter now, so it should be a little better.
Okay, so if you speak this loud, we should be fine.
Okay, awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, knowledge is power. We tell you that private corporations already have enough power and that fundamentally their incentives are not aligned with the social good. Therefore, we should propose this motion. In my speech, you're going to hear three things. Firstly, rebuttals to the case of opposition, then an elaboration on a case that we brought to you in this debate, and then lastly, my own constructive. So firstly, then, towards the point about impartiality, because we hear it in like these little hints from the first speaker. We tell you that if they want to constantly refer to it, they should have brought it earlier. We believe that that is already a strategical mistake. But regardless, we would like to posit that governments have an incentive to do good things because they're scrutinized, because they're accountable to their citizens in ways that private capital is not, as I'm going to tell you later. Therefore, we believe that this impartiality is qualitatively different, and also we would not like to have this motion in countries where academia is literally enslaved to the state. Second point of rebuttal, where they tell us that they can develop cool stuff on their side of the house. We would like to challenge this on three levels. Firstly, on the level of exclusivity, because we tell you that there are other sources through which these institutions can get their money. That already many of them are of such a high quality that and they have done this and reached this point without private capital. We need to hear exclusivity. We tell you that governments not only are the ones who are paying the most, but also principally should be paying the most, as it is their responsibility. But we also tell you that the other sources that we provided to you in the POI, such as crowdsourcing, are extremely valuable in today's world. For example, look at the Barron campaign in the USA. Absolute majority of it was funded through crowdsourcing and managed to raise millions of dollars. We believe that we can still get a lot of money on our side of the house. Secondly, on the point of exclusivity, what we never hear from proposition is the change to status quo. Why cannot Facebook hire its own engineers? It would obviously do that on our side of the house as well. Why does it necessarily need these institutions? We tell you that the harms that would bring outweigh the benefits. The second line of attack is through limitation, because we tell you that the best case scenario of opposition is one where only some areas are targeted, meaning that only there where the incentives of institutions and private capital intersect, they will get their benefits. We tell you that this does not apply to the whole spectrum of academic research, therefore quantitative get more impact. No, thank you. And lastly, on the point about how this is so crucial in developing countries, we see this as absolutely divorced from reality, because we tell you that it is better that we do research in the developed world because it will be of a much higher quality and the results of it will be accessible worldwide. Therefore, we believe that it is better this research in the developed world. No, thank you. Now then, on to the points of rebuilding. And here I want to talk to you firstly about money. Why we prefer the state. I already told you that not only is it I want to talk to you about how it is in state's incentive to fund these institutions, because what we never heard from opposition was an attack on why it doesn't have the incentive to fund it a lot. We tell you that we see an increasing trend of valuing universities because it is a good diplomatical tool in the current political climate. It is a way to exert smart power. Worldwide, universities want to attract foreign students. We can see this trend in America, United Kingdom, but even recently China, who is trying to look good on the international sphere, and the best way it can do so is through universities. Therefore, we believe too that the trend is to fund academia more through the state. But we also tell you that it should fundamentally be the state's role, because it should guarantee the safety that this research is not abused.
no thank you. But moreover, we tell you that even if we took opposition on their best case scenario and assumed that there would be less research on our side of the house, we would still prefer that world, because we tell you that at least this research would not be harmful. And here, the lack of reaction of opposition to the case that we brought in our first speaker is so damaging, because we tell you that research fundamentally has oftentimes a lot more potential to do bad things than to do good things. Like, one study can literally confuse so many people to make extremely harmful decisions about their life, about their health, and this will impact their whole life. This has an impact across the society, and we tell you this can all happen through one study that is misplaced, influenced by private capital. We tell you that we cannot let that happen. Go ahead.
Are you assuring that every government in the world will only have the best interests of their people in mind?
Okay, we tell you that, first of all, no, it remains the same on both sides of the house. You do not solve this issue either. We tell you that, like, we still win this debate if we can show to you that that private capital is bad and that keeping it out of institutions is beneficial. But also, I want to talk to you about why incentives of private capital are not aligned with social good, because this is where opposition loses. Because what we require of them is a structural analysis for why capital is good for institutions and why it is aligned with social good. And we brought you 3 reasons for why that is not. We deal with it firstly. Companies have an incentive to exploit every opportunity to get ahead. So how can this look? Firstly, they can avoid competition. We saw this in the low-fat example brought up by my first speaker. It is a lot more expensive to fund like more R&D and make your product better than to smear your opponent through influenced studies. Secondly, we tell you that you can make consumers take less care for their safety, and therefore you have one less condition that you need to take into account. Therefore, again, you can save money. This is the example of cigarettes. Because of this confusion was created, companies were able to save money and therefore make more money, make more profit, which was not aligned with social good. And the third structural reason is the dilution of responsibilities. And this is the example of the gamblers, because we tell you that the gambling casinos were able to hide behind the authority of these big name institutions, of these researchers, and therefore were able to ditch their responsibility, which they have an incentive to do. So overall, we tell that incentives are not aligned. We require a structural analysis from opposition. In my split argument, I'm going to extend on how academia holds a crucial role in the society and why we cannot let objectivity get lost. Because we tell you that we live in a world where almost everything is uncertain. Because media has an incentive to scandalize and politics has an incentive to divide. Everyone can get away with lying in the current world. Everyone except educational and research institutions, because they hold objectivity at its core as its core value. They have an incentive to pursue the truth. And we tell you that just as much as we wouldn't allow private corporations to give donations to justice, to the justice sector, to judges in courts and buy them like new cars or fund their research or fund their facilities, we believe that they also should not come into academia, because academia has a role in the public discussion. It has a role in future development, and it is principally wrong that we ditch this crucial value and institution which upholds objectivity from our society. For those reasons, because knowledge is power, because companies already have too much power, you should propose.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Before moving into our next speech, just wanted to remind you guys, so that link, I hope it's the link for whatever you're streaming, right? That's the link that you put in the chat.
Yeah, that should be
it. Okay, so yeah, just a reminder, please don't communicate with your team in the chat, but since this is common, like for the common good, okay. So it's okay this way. So thank you for that speech, and I give the floor to the second speaker of team opposition. You're here.
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Dear colleagues and members of the proposition, my speech will be organized in three major parts. First, I will now analyze how they tried to rebut our two first major arguments. Then, I will rebuttal their third major argument, and then I will present you our third major argument and extend on our major arguments, the major arguments of the opposition. First, they say that having enough power, these companies, they will be able to do, such as trying to invest in researchers that are going to confuse, that make the public even in a worse situation. However, are you saying that the governments have less power than these companies? Governments, if they are the only one to invest in researchers, they have much more, actually, reliability when it comes to the population. And then if a government is trying to invest in a research that is going to be bad for its own population, it's going to be much worse than if a private company is doing that. So the argument that having enough power is the justification for giving to only the governments and NGOs the power to invest in researches is completely flawed, because governments are more powerful than these companies. About impartiality, that the government, they are accountable to their citizens, so they will invest in good researches. So in my third major argument, I'll explain to you how this is completely flawed. Actually, they tried to show us that nowadays we can see increasing trends, that the countries, they want to be good looking internationally, so the governments are going to be good looking internationally, so they will fund researchers with examples of UK, China, and US. Actually, UK and US are the countries where sponsorship for researchers from private companies is way bigger than the government ones. So I can see how these examples can be used to your argument. Third, they challenge us in three levels. That other sources can get money, less source that would not be harmful. So they're saying that even though the researchers would get less sources, these researchers wouldn't be bad. However, we can see nowadays, such as my first speaker said, that the cure for coronavirus with a vaccine can only be attained because private researchers are doing their job and paying for academic institutions to find the solution for this epidemic. So what you can see is that actually when we can provide private companies funding these researches, we can see, I agree, bad results, but the positive ones, they outstand and they stand out when you compare if just the government was trying to invest, and this government could be harmful too. So in a comparative analysis, our side is stronger. So they say that these researches should not be made in developing countries, but just in the developed ones. So this is an argument that is completely flawed, because it states that those countries that do not have today a good financial condition to invest in researches, they will be completely backwards when it comes to scientific innovation. But this will just continue the inequality in the world. And then the problems that they're trying to solve, such as health issues, they're going to be much bad, because the inequality produces problems such as hunger, such as people that do not have even where to live. So if scientific innovation is allowed in the developing countries by private companies funding the researchers, we would see that these countries would be more developed and solve other problems that are even greater than the ones affirmed by the proposition. And the third major argument, going to the second part of my speech, is that it's good for companies to create bad researches. But this argument, it is flawed, because first, these companies, they rely on selling these products to the major population. So if the population sees that this product is not good, or if the researchers are not being conducted in a good way, they will not buy this product. However, if all is relied on the government, the population won't have the means to just say, oh, I will stop to buy a product. No, because they are inside a government. They are inside a social institution that cannot be escaped, such as a private company. So by my third major argument, you will see that giving the population the opportunity to rely on researches by the private companies is a better way to ensure democracy. So let's go to our third major argument. The contempt for science perverting government can be seen from the United States, where Donald Trump neglects the importance of funding the humanities, to all developing countries, wherein scientific knowledge is seen as an enemy to the religious or customary beliefs. For some scientists, it's hard enough to trying to convince many elected readers that they should be informed by scientific research rather than philosophical or religious beliefs on politically charged issues, without having also to defend corporate-based studies. So today, I will show you that anti-science beliefs jeopardize democracy, and restricting who can invest in science will jeopardize democracy too. In the US, for instance, a large number of major parties contenders for political office in the last elections took anti-science positions against evolution, human-induced climate change, vaccines, stem cell research, and more. The Republican Party, for instance, denialism affirms that the conviction that global warming is a hoax. Billions of measurements show it as a fact, but the political parties that control the investments from the government that comes from the Ministry of Education and not from impartial institutions, such as the proposition said, they just say that climate change do not exist, or that we should teach the controversy to school children over whether life on the planet was shaped by evolution over millions of years or an intelligence designer over thousands of years, when today scientists agree evolution is real. Dear judges, what if most of funding for scientific research could not come from corporate sponsorship, and that these anti-science political groups were responsible for conducting most of the investments in science? The result will be terrible. These government-based attacks on science are even more dangerous because most of the political parties today have been taken to attacking the validity of science itself as a basis for public policy when science disagree with their ideology. In this perspective, we can affirm that by the rise of far right in most of the Western countries, such as Hungary, Brazil, the United States of America, many parties have adopted an authoritarian approach that demands ideological conformity, even when contradicted by scientific evidence, and have tried to ostracize those who do not conform by attacking university and academic institutions. So what would be the implications if the motion is implemented? Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, and the facts that dictate our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. When facts become opinions, the collective policy-making process of democracy begins to break down. When the anti-science argument tries to restrict who can sponsor an academic research, the chances are high that government becomes reactive, invests only on researchers that agree with its ideology, and becomes late at solving problems. Indeed, the national dialogue would be mired in warring opinions. So the science would be put at risk, but not just science, democracy. I beg you to vote for the opposition.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. I'm just going to give a few seconds to the judges. Okay. And I give the floor to the third speaker of Team Government. Here.
Okay, am I audible? Is it okay?
Yes.
It is the lack of engagement, especially concerning our already three mentioned arguments, that loses the side of opposition today's debate. What I'm going to do in my speech are two things. First, I'm going to clarify the context of today's debate in which today's debate should happen. And then I will tell you the final comparative under which side we have a higher amount of reliable research, and even if we had less research, why we still take today's debate. So let's take a look at the context of today's debate. There are three things. First, the side of opposition saying that there would be not enough of capital or funding for this academic research. So what we told you are two things. First, that we have still governments that are in the status quo motivated to put money into research, and it is not enough for the side of opposition to say that there are some governments who do not have this incentive because they do not cater to the society as much. We still have the democratic governments that do finance the research pretty a lot. For example, concerning the COVID-19 crisis, which was mentioned by side of opposition, there were literally millions of dollars coming to this direction of COVID-19 research to find a vaccine, etc. So we believe that there is this incentive from this government in the first place. But even if that was not true, we told you the other alternative, and that is the crowdsourcing and the finance coming from the NGOs. And here, this is basically also the reaction to their split argument when they say that these institutions would otherwise have no money. We've already explained to you that these are the resources of finance that already exist in the status quo. They did not respond to this alternative whatsoever. So we believe that in terms of the amount of capital that would be into the direction of academic research is enough, and therefore this should not be the problem. Second idea under the context are this like practicability of the research, whether this research that is conducted in the status quo, not financed by those institutions, can be practicable. And here we told you that just simply it's not enough for opposition to state that only private companies finance this practicable research. We believe that this is simply not true, because also the universities have motivation to conduct research that is practicable in all areas, because you want to improve the status quo in general. You want to get some more information, and you cannot say that this information is just theoretic. We believe that all new information that comes from the research is useful and can be used for improvement of the society. But secondly, under this point of practical research, we told you that for those companies, if they want to significantly improve their development, or if they have some problems in their framework, they can still hire private researchers, and therefore we don't really see why there is this necessity of academia existing, and because of this profit incentive that exists behind those companies, why these companies should negatively influence the research conducted by academias. But thirdly, under the idea of context, we had this whole idea of developing countries, where the side of opposition again told us that from some not known reason, only private companies finance the research in developing countries. We had literally no example why this is happening. We believe that also these private companies finance more the research in the developed world. But secondly, we told you that there is still this already mentioned NGOs and crowdsourcing that exists for those developing countries as well. No, thank you. And also what we told you, and was not responded by side of opposition, is this idea that even if the research is conducted more in the developed world, the results can be used worldwide, even if there is some problem in the developing world. We believe that the developed world has motivation to solve this problem. For example, concerning the Ebola crisis, in which there was research conducted also by the universities in the developed world. So this principle that we stand for, that we fight for, we believe is universal. It's not. It's for the whole world, and we believe that it is not enough for the side of opposition to argue only about developing countries. So now moving on to the final comparative of today's debate, being who has higher amount of reliable research. But before that, I'll take the POI.
Okay, so you're saying that the crowdsourcing from NGOs will be the same as the source that comes from Apple, Amazon, and these big companies, when these NGOs companies, they mainly rely on volunteers, and they don't even sell products to earn more profit and then invest in research.
Yeah, this crowdsourcing, yes, comes from the volunteers. We believe that the difference is that these NGOs do not dictate the purpose of this money. It is different when you come as a corporation and say, look, we need to have some research about gambling, saying that gambling is not that harmful, that is not that addictive, and then having the results that they need. We believe that there is inherent difference in the motivations of NGOs and of those of this business sourcing as a whole and of those corporate profit incentivized corporations. So now moving on to the final clash of today's debate, being who has more reliable research. There are two things. First, why there is more likelihood under the side of opposition to have misinformed society, and second, why there is likely to be confusion and mistrust even when they publish reliable research. So let's take a look at the first point about misinformed society. What we provided you with and what was not responded by side of opposition were those three structural reasons coming from our second speaker and the studies from our first speaker concerning the cigarettes, sugar, and gambling. So these were three examples on which we analyzed you the incentives about how these companies are likely to exploit this opportunity of having influence over the academic research. So this was primarily competition, the fact that consumers will tend to be less careful, and finally getting rid of responsibility that they have. We believe that those structural reasons cause this fact that the research is likely to be influenced and resulting in those bad decisions made by our society. We believe that the result is clear. The result is that those vulnerable members of society who want to make rational decisions are not able to do so because there is this misinformation coming from those corporate incentive, from this profit incentive that is manifested in the result of the research. But secondly, even if we say that in the world of opposition there is certain amount of reliable research that is, for example, not funded by those corporations, we say that there is lower likelihood of this research being trusted by the society because there is already existing confusion that is caused by the fact that by the presence of these corporations in the sphere. And we believe for this reason, because they have more misinformed society, because they have more confused people and people who don't trust the academia, that should take the objectivity when the other institutions are failing. We should take today's debate. So what is the final comparative here? We tell you that it is much better to have more informed society, people who make those decisions, and even if we take the side of opposition at their highest ground and say that they would have better development of some STEM or companies, we say that it is still better to protect the decision-making process of those vulnerable individuals. So for all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. And I'm just going to give a few seconds to the judges. Okay, and I give the floor to the third speaker of team opposition. Here.
Hi, is everyone hearing me well?
Yes.
Okay. I start my speech right now. Dear colleagues from the proposition and dear judges, the speeches made by my fellow debaters make clear which side has won in most of the clashes. My goal in the speech will be to show that our case still stands in the light of the attacks made by the proposition. I'll start addressing the three major clashes of this debate. Also, I'll add an additional clash that happened a lot, even though it wasn't a main argument of both of these parts, in which I will follow this order. First, I will state the proposition argument. Second, I will present our rebuttal. Third, I will explain why our side is the most reasonable in this clash. So I'm going to start saying the argument that they said, non-profit investment only wants one thing, the massive amounts of externalities. So there would be many drawbacks when corporate invest on research. Well, if the government is the major sponsor, anti-science parties would be able to take up the reins of the government, and then academic institutions would not be able to help corporate partners to find solutions in their problems. As my first speaker said, innovation would be put at risk. If the actual presidents of the US, of Brazil, and of Hungary, just to mention a few, controlled all of the funding, there will be no academic development on topics as how minorities need reparative policies, how the environment needs urgent solutions, and how quarantine is necessary to stop the spread of COVID-19. So the vulnerable groups will not be protected by the researchers, but actually, there would not be any voice that is different from the government to protect these groups. The important thing in science is not so much to obtain new facts as to discover new ways of thinking about them. I'm sorry, the telephone is beeping right now. Sorry. So I may continue. If government controls all, there will be not different ways of thinking. In an age when science influences every aspect of life, from the most private intimacies of sex and reproduction to the most public collective challenges of climate change and the economy. I'm sorry. And in a time when democracy has become the dominant form of government on the planet, it is a threat to the democratization and evolution of science that not only the government and NGOs are able to sponsor academic researches, but also corporate groups.
Why?
Furthermore, the implication of the model presented by the affirmation side is that in countries that government do not have budget to invest in academic research, because it is still trying to get their population out of hunger and poverty, so there just will be a greater lift. With this general downtrend in states' investment in researches, especially with the raising of anti-science conservative movements, the universities, the research institutions need private sources of funding in order to continue working. And I'll say about that additional class that I already said. Even though it wasn't a major argument of everybody, they said that developed countries should monopolize their research so they can have more quality. Ladies and gentlemen, they clearly supported neocolonialism. They support the fact that developed countries should continue to manipulate the global south in the way that they want, since knowledge is power, as said by the proposition. Then also said that our research that happens in a developed country can be used worldwide. Do you think that countries like China and USA that benefit from the neocolonialism would focus on solving these issues? I don't think so. So the private investment is a way that these developing countries with a poor investment in universities, with the rising of anti-science governments, as we already said, and whose population can't afford crowdfunding because they have to eat and pay their bills, can emancipate from the global north researchers, and finally overcome the colonialist perspective, developing in both social and technological perspective. Also they said that crowdsourcing from NGOs would solve the lack of investment. We say that the sources from private companies are much larger than the ones for NGOs. It is the same. It is the same to say that an NGO such as the one that acts only by volunteers has the same budget than Amazon, Apple, and any other private company. Then they say that researchers that are not from private companies are not outcome based, but as said by our second speaker, the government can influence most of the results of their sponsored researchers to privilege their ideology. Also, when they said about gambling, sugar, and cigarette taxes, we say that the government is the one that benefits the most from taxes that comes from gambling, sugar, and cigarette taxes, because we all know that those are lucrative industries. Also, they say that the quantity of researchers confuses people. Well, we say that, and they also said a lot about what will be more reliable, the government or the private company, what would the media support the most, and we just say something like that. What would be more propagated and believed? The anti-science government saying that the climate change is fake and saying that universities are fake, showing the fake and biased researchers, because as we already said, government can support biased researchers, or the university showing a real research, What will be more reliable? Biased researches and opinions can come from everywhere, not only corporates. Now I'll go to the fact that our side affirmed that corporate sponsorship is essential for the maintenance of democracy. This argument was completely ignored by the proposition. We would just like to state that the private-based developed. Sorry, just have some water. The private base develop. We need different sources to ensure the plurality in democracy. So I believe that by saying all of these clashes, everything that they said, I showed the judges that the opposition side not only showed more reliable arguments and more applicable arguments, but we also counter-argument everything that they said in a way that showed why the opposition side is correct. Thank you so much. I end my speech.
Okay, thank you for that. Give me just a few seconds to just check that everybody's in the room because the overall number of participants decreased. So, yeah, so the judges are here. Elena is here, Osama is here, cool. So we have Team Czech Republic, I can still see you. And Brazil, okay, we're good. Okay, we're good. So just a few seconds. Okay, thank you very much for that speech, and I give the floor to the reply speaker of Team Opposition for their speech. Here.
Thank you. I will start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To limit the sponsorship of researchers is to insult a nation. To prohibit the advancement of certain academic developments is to declare the inhabitants to be either fools or slaves. Such a prohibition ought to fill them with disdain. Dear judges, I will, in this reply speech, try to show you that the main clashes of this debate today were won by the opposition. So first, I'd like to state that there were 3 main clashes in 3 main areas today. The first one was about the source of the investments. So if we stop the private funding, will the researchers continue? The second major area of clashes was about the good to the population. So is it good or bad? Is it good for or bad for humanity that private companies invest on researchers? And the third major clash was about democracy. So if most of the investments are made by the government, so is democracy safe? These were the 3 main clashes, and I'm going to develop right now in this order about how we want today. So about the sources of investments, the proposition affirmed that if we could use the crowdsourcing, if we could put that NGOs would invest in the academic researches, we would easily replace all the investments that are nowadays based on private companies. And the main argument that they use to fill this logical reasoning is that US, China, and UK nowadays are governments that they're investing more in the researches than these private companies. However, first, this is a lie. In countries such as UK and the US, private companies investing in science makes that these countries are the first one in researches and for finding the main solutions for the humanities problems. So to say that the government is responsible for the good results in developed countries is a completely lie. And And as my first speaker said, if we could just stop the investments from all the private companies, the result was that only a few countries in the world would be able to invest in research. The inequality would just grow larger and larger every year. And then the problems of humanity with inequality that I've stated for you, such as poverty, such as people that do not have even what to eat, would not be solved. So they are not solving any problem in humanity by affirming this model. About the good to the population, they say that nowadays the researchers, they confuse the population. The researchers, they make the population feel bad because, they can't be conformed by the fact that one research was bad, was saying that something bad is actually good. However, first, they are affirming that the population is fool to do not know that some things are bad, such as sugar and cigarette. And another point is that private companies make that good researches are possible of happening in all the places of the world. Nowadays, we have more than 500 spots in the world that are trying to find vaccines for the COVID-19. But if just the government could invest this money, certainly it will not be able for developing countries to find a solution for this epidemic, such as the innovation would be at risk if just governments and NGOs would control the investment in researches. And the third major clash was about democracy, that democracy is completely in danger if we just put governments investing in them, conservative governments, far-right governments. They just ignored all that our second speaker said. So if one argument, democracy, they just don't even answer. And the two others, we won. It is clear that the opposition won this debate today. I thank the judges and thank for the proposition side for being here today.
Thank you very much for that speech. And I give the floor to the reply speaker of team government to conclude this debate. Here.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Imagine growing up in the 70s, seeing your father happily chain smoke a pack of Lucky Strikes every day after work. 5 years after he dies of terminal lung cancer, it is leaked that the tobacco industry has been lying to you for too long because they have been financing misleading research. You don't want your children to face the same fate. You want them to be healthy. So you avoid fatty foods at the expense of extra sugar. But after they get more obese and one of them develops diabetes, it is also found out that the sugar industry has done the exact same thing. Not only were you harmed on the individual level and your family members were harmed as well, but you feel betrayed because you see that the academia has been misleading you, because the concept of truth is something that you no longer believe in. This is the world of side opposition, and this is why we are so proud to propose. I'll do two things in my speech. Firstly, I'll take a look at where there is more funding, and secondly, I'll be taking a look at the quality of research on both sides. But before that, just one quick note on strategy, because note that they have been lacking engagement throughout the entire debate. They have only responded to our first two arguments properly and engaged with the structural analysis in their third, which is also characterized by the fact that their second and their third speaker hasn't taken a POI. Now let's get to the question about funding, because opposition tells us several things. The first thing they tell us is that cooperation of companies and academia is important for the development of those companies. But we told them, why these companies can already use this, already develop stuff for themselves. We gave them a POI about how Amazon and IBM already does that, and we have been continuously reiterating this inside of our speeches. They failed to provide structural analysis as to why academia is in any way more important and why this is something exclusive, right? But secondly, they talk to you about COVID, right? They talk to you about how private companies have to cooperate. But we already told you, hey, hey guys, look, the government is literally spending like $2 trillion in the US just to kickstart the economy. Why can't it spare just a few billions to fund COVID research? We don't think that them characterizing states as like literally being unable to fund a COVID vaccine is representative. But then they talk to us about religious countries where like they give you no examples as to why a private or as to how a private company does funding in those religious countries, right? But we think that this is not necessarily important because Viktor tells you that if the state already has such oversight over the research, then you won't do much difference, right? But Viktor also tells you, my second speaker, that like rich and developed countries do research on COVID. Rich and developed countries do research on Ebola, and this is then distributed to everywhere else in the world. And this is important because then we don't see the importance of their case. But we also told you that in terms of funding, we can like properly attract it through other methods, right? But even if this were not true, we tell you that we don't care because it's about the quality, not the quantity. Because when you have less bad incentives, such as the fact that you want to avoid competition or like provide less safety for your consumers or dilute responsibilities, we say that you should pick our side. Because under their side, the 3% of scientists that deny climate change will not get funding because no institution will give it to them. And we say this is less quantity, but we are happy for that because what we want is research that benefits the society. We want research that makes the individual make the rational choice and the choice that suits them the most. And that is why you vote proposition.
Thank you very much for that speech. So I give everyone, let me just unshare my screen because this is annoying. Okay, cool. Much better. Okay, so thank you guys for the speech and for the debate. We're not in real life, so instead of crossing floors and shaking hands, just a virtual high five. If you also have your cameras on, it will actually work. So I think this is the best we can do to keep the spirit going. So as judges will go and deliberate for between 20 and 30 minutes. say yes or show us a thumbs up.
Yes, I think they are just joining, right? They will be back in like 10 seconds.
Okay.
We're here.
Okay.
Brazil's here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for this round, Helena will be delivering the adjudication speech because of the way the decisions have been made. Because Helena is in the majority, she will deliver the adjudication speech. So just to know that what's happening. So I'll give her the floor, the virtual floor. Go for it.
So we had a very interesting and very long discussion about this, because we in the end came to a split decision in which Laura, the chair, was in the minority. So in the split decision, the win goes to side opposition, Team Brazil. And Laura was the judge who gave it to side government. And hence you have now me with the oral adjudication. Please ask Laura in the individual feedback about her specifics and the specific reasons within this, because we all on the panel definitely agreed that this was a very close debate, and it was very close for several reasons. The main reason was that we had the feeling that both sides underanalyzed their argumentation too much in too many places within this debate, so that at too many places, very good ideas which came from both teams were so underanalyzed that we had one-liners to very often. So this did lead to this unfortunate position where the judges had to weigh out what they believe more into, which then led to this split decision. Second reason of why this was so close was that there was quite little engagement from both sides. So you basically debated quite away from each other at too many places within this debate. And this little engagement specifically came when it was about like the impacting, about like whether or not the examples that are functioning here, but also on the level of characterization, whether or not governments or private corporations are good or bad within here. So those are the main reasons of why this became so close and so contentious. World schools debating happening on three levels. We think on the level of style, side government definitely wins that part of this. The main reason here is that with side opposition, we had the feeling that you very often just read off a lot of things and therefore were quite one note with a lot of the things that you said. So on side government, stylistically, we had a stronger, stronger style within this, making this decision even closer in the end. Now, the big area of where this debate was decided on for the majority was the area of content. And I think, I'm going to go through this, I think, in four different reasons, because I've written them down this way. So I think the first reasons on why on content it went to side opposition is the point about characterization of the situation that we have here. So inside government, there was the flaw that you didn't characterize clearly enough to us why corporations are exclusively going to be acting badly. So you based your argumentation very much on these three examples that you had that were tobacco, sugar, and gambling, and you failed to explain to us why they're also going to be bad in other areas of this. So on this point about like characterization and about like where we are going to have research, opposition already had a bigger impact that they showed to us that in many areas of research, they are going to have worse research within this. So like, even if we buy those examples of tobacco, for example, we believe that it was quite limited to these examples, but that there's still quite a lot of areas which are going to be better in opposition, because these corporations do have personal interest in this. The second reasons of why on this point about corporation acting and characterization is that we were not entirely sure whether or not this is going to be solved specifically. And this area about whether or not this motion is actually going to be impacting the issues you're talking about and solving the issues you're talking about was one of the big points of contention between who voted for what, because the majority had the feeling that opposition did a better job in explaining to us that the harms that you are bringing are exclusive to taking private corporations out of this, whilst Laura had the feeling that you did not explain this quite well, that you were not making it clear why private corporations are so specifically needed in order to be doing all of this research within here. Then the second reason is just the amount of money that we have. And this became a major wash between this because neither of the sides quantified to us how much money we're actually talking about within the situation. So this very much came to how the judges really believe this and how the judges believe that the amount of money is here. For the majority, we did believe that through private corporations, we probably have more money within this, whilst the minority had the feeling that on government, we still have a sufficient amount of money that is needed within this situation here. So both teams would have benefited majorly from quantifying how much money specifically we are talking about and how we could have been solving this. Therefore, this point did become quite a wash. But in the end, the majority had the feeling that on our position, through private corporations funding this, we have more money for research on our position, therefore more research on our position. Third point, and probably biggest the decision for the minority, was the question on where we have better research. And again, here is a problem where it became a bit of a wash that nobody really proved to us how this research looks like whether or not this is like really free research, really useful research, in what areas this research can be, in all of those different things. So specifically for me here, you should have been both teams clearer on what we are talking about. So government very much said about like there's confused, nobody knows what is true, but there we were unsure, or I was unsure about what is happening. Opposition, on the other hand, then, for example, also didn't really tell to us what good research and useful research and practically applied research is. Also, I know that sometimes culturally these things sound like sarcasm. This is not what I meant. Like, this was literally, I am quoting what you said there. I just want to make clear that I'm not sarcastically repeating what you're saying, but literally quoting things that we got from opposition. So the reason here why opposition does take it then over on here is that opposition does this characterization point reasonably well of proving to us that they are not all bad, that corporations are not that harsh about the situations. This again is one of the points which came to quite contentions on us because on the other hand, Laura had the feeling that you did not actually prove to us so well that these examples were do this. So there was this feeling of like a cherry picking on both sides. Opposition only talks about like fake news and climate change denial and flat earthers, whilst government only talks about sugar, tobacco, and gambling. So this became then there a bit of an issue there that it was a bit of an example picking. But in the end, the majority felt that opposition proves well enough to us that those big companies are not that bad exclusively. But the main reasons of why for the majority this argument goes to side government is the characterization, side opposition is the characterization of governments. So proposition does bring us some reasons why governments are going to be really good. Those specifically, they care about their people, they have the incentives to be doing this, universities is doing something here. So the problem we had in the majority here was that we did not believe that this was true for the extent of countries that is needed, but also not entirely true if this like even is true for the perfect country that you are having there, because even the perfect country, let's take Germany because everybody used this. I am taking Germany because I'm there from there. But we still have like our universities are chronically underfunded within the situations. Now, this did not become part of this because I do believe that this is probably a specific knowledge on Germany. But generally, we do see that in these situations, the perfect government still doesn't perfectly care about everybody. But second of all, opposition does a good job in explaining to us all of the reasons of why governments do not care, specifically using examples of countries where this is just not going to go. So on this point about like better research, we had the feeling that opposition brings us enough reasons of why private corporations are not that bad, but also on this clash on whether or not the government is going to act well, opposition gives us more reasons of why they're probably not always going to be perfect. Now, this is also something where the majority was very convinced or quite convinced of, is this whole point about principle. So both of you were talking about where is freedom, where's more freedom of research. And one of the big reasons of why this part is taken by side opposition is because side government did not engage with this point close to at all. So there was like no responses to this attacks that the opposition did on this clash on freedom of research. So the freedom of research that we get on site government is that now there's less pressure by these companies with the money, that therefore they don't have to follow these incentives. Now, the reason of why this did not become this convincing for the panel is that was so much limited by the examples you used. So the impression that then in the end comes, yes, you're probably true that there's going to be less freedom on tobacco research, but we are unsure, A, how this tobacco research is going to look like, but B, there are a lot of areas which probably are not affected specifically by these perverse incentives. Therefore, we were unsure about the degree of impact that this freedom of research infringement has. On opposition, on the other hand, they do give us several good reasons of why there is going to be a limitation to a higher degree, specifically that the government is now the only deciding factor, so that with whatever the government wants, they have incentives to be pressuring this on, which is going to be leading to an infringement on research freedom in more areas within this. But also, we had the feeling that there was more of a direct reason of why this is going to be happening. So generally, those were the most clear reason. There were some points outside of this where we believe that this made it even more closer within this. So, for example, site government did prove quite well that there is this point about the credibility of these research papers, which was never engaged by opposition, which was unfortunately also underdeveloped again. Then opposition did bring us some lines along developing nations, why they were why they're so impacted by this, but also underdeveloped. Therefore, those reasons, whilst they were nice ideas, due to the underdevelopment of them, they did not become this big part of the decision making. Now, finalizing a little bit about what were the other reasons of why this was a split decision was added to the things that I already said, is that Prop generally gave more analysis for the reasons, for the arguments that they had, so that on the comparative between the two sides for the dissenting voice, there was more reasons given to why they are true, and the dissenting voice did have the feeling that there was more of a connection to the motion compared to side opposition, that specifically inside opposition, those one-liners tended to be a little bit unstructured and unclear within this debate. Therefore, the link to the case and the link to the motion were lacking to this. So those were the main reason why this was a split decision. I hope that this was useful. And now I think we go to individual feedback. I would say that we do it in the way that the team that the dissenting judges gave